Can you tell me briefly how you handle getting hit with a piece of news you never expect? You're living a beautiful life, everything seems to be going swimmingly, and then all of a sudden there's this life-changing, life-threatening event. How do you deal with that?
Oh God. It takes the wind out of you. It's one of those things where I think my first feeling is, this is unfair. This can't be right. We've done everything we were supposed to do. How can this be? Disbelief. For me, there was also some, desperation mixes with anger, mixes with powerlessness, mixes with a sense of, as I said, unfairness. Emotions swirl around it. It's almost like your worst fears become manifest, and you don't know how to find your way forward. You're just lost in a tempest, in a storm of these mixed emotions that go all over the place. Fear, deep grief about you imagine the life you no longer can have. You see all this, it's just like the world changes in a heartbeat, and you're not prepared. You just don't know what to do. And I think it's just one of those instances in life where there are no up is down, down is up, sideways is all over the place. And so the main thing for me became something about not making any wrong moves in my state of confusion, but just try to deal with the news that we were given. And in that was also a good portion of denial, and I don't want to know about this. As I said, I don't deserve this. He doesn't deserve this. Our kids don't deserve this. The people we know don't deserve this. And in the denial is also a desire to try and keep it from everybody, keep it from oneself. So it's a whirlwind of emotions and thoughts and fears that you never anticipated and never wanted to deal with, and all of a sudden they're just there.
Walter, you have a double burden, because as the patient, it's happening to you directly, but you also know it's being visited on your family. What's that like?
Well, let me go back a little bit and say that when we got that news, the first thing I went through was a few days of almost being numb, like almost disbelief. And then we went through a couple of phases where we're like, no, we're going to be okay. And when two different doctors said, you're going to have a transplant, we were like, well, I'm going to eat organic food. I haven't been drinking for years. I haven't taken drugs for years. I'm going to live really clean. I'm going to live good. I'm going to go out and take walks every day. And as long as we eat the organic food and I take supplements, and no, we're going to be fine. And no, that's a worst case scenario. They're just trying to freak us out. And little by little, it took us a little while for it to really sink in. I think we went through a phase of we're going to beat this, and but then you realize, no, they're right. It's going to be a transplant, or you're not going to survive. And for me, it is the double whammy of, okay, I'll lose my life, but my kids are going to lose their dad. My wife is going to lose her husband. this whole thing that we have built together, that she and I have worked hard and built together over many years, this is probably going to be the end of it without the transplant. And it's really almost, it still was hard to believe, even when it came to, yeah, it's going to have to be a transplant. I didn't really expect to survive. Deep down inside, I told myself, get ready, because this is it. Here it is. You've done what you did, you've lived your life. You've had love in your life. You've managed to have some great kids. You've built something with your wife. You've made some albums. You've made some music to leave behind. And it was a great life, really. It was a beautiful adventure I went through. But I didn't expect to survive it, A great blues drummer whose name was Max Bangwell, who played with a lot of people. He was dying of cancer, and he was close to death. And he came to see us in Cleveland, where he lived. And they carried him up on the stage, and he watched us from the wings. He weighed about 70 pounds. And at the end of the show, he asked Mike Lazier, can I say something? And they carried him out to the microphone. And he said, and he smiled and laughed and said, none of you weep for me or feel bad for me. He goes, I got to run away from home, join the circus, and see the world. He had been a touring musician all his life, but that was his quote. I joined the circus and I saw the world, and it was great. And he had a big smile on his face. And that's what I was feeling when I was in that bed. It was great, But here I am.
I think that first lightning bolt, the disbelief and denial is probably first.
Yeah.
This can't be.
Yeah, it's the denial. This can't be. We don't believe what they're telling us. We know better.
You're going to wake up and
she
it's not going to be
started-
real.
Yeah.
She started just cooking organic food with no salt and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, we're going to be fine. And we're taking these vitamins now, and we'll turn this around.
Yeah, and doctors paint the devil on the wall. Because this can't be.
No,
right?
this can't be.
This can't be. We've done everything right, and we're going to do it even better from now on. So I think the first reaction is disbelief, denial. Something that horrible, you can't take it in. You just, at least that's what we did, I think, for quite a while.
Yeah.
Just, no, heck no, not us.
Yeah.
That's for other people. This doesn't happen to us.
No, we've worked hard. We've been good people. And this can't happen to us because we certainly don't deserve this. And the doctors, they don't know what they're talking about. We got it. And as each week passed and I got worse and worse, it was like, I think those doctors were onto something. I'm not going to make it,
Did you both reach a realization at the same time about the seriousness, or were you on different paths?
I think neither of us ever really said to each other, you're not going to make it. That was unspoken, I believe. I think we both felt it. I think we felt it down inside, but we always, I think, tried to be positive. We're going to fight. You're going to fight this. We're going to get through this. And without her positive attitude every day, I don't think I would have made it, along with her dealing with the medical people. But her coming into that hospital every day and smiling and, yeah, come on, we're going to get through this. I would have just given up.
There was actually a moment in time when the denial and the pretense and the whole thing stopped completely. And that's one morning one evening when Walter called me in. He was very, very sick. He was still at home. He hadn't been hospitalized yet. And he said to me, "Marie, I just can't fight this. I can't fight anymore. I am so tired. Everything hurts." He was black and blue from his waist down. His whole body was filled with infection, and he was swelled up by this ascites that was all through his body.
I couldn't walk. I couldn't get out of bed without help.
Yeah, I had to help him to the bathroom, everything. And that was the first time it was spoken, where Walter basically said, "I just want to go. I just want to float away," is how you spoke it. You wanted to be on the other side.
How is it to hear that from the love of your life?
Well, the story goes on.
So at first, I just had deep compassion with him because I could see how much he hurt, and I wanted to do the best thing for him. And so I said, "I understand. Whatever you need, I will be here and support you. If you need to have my blessing to stop fighting, I understand. I understand. If you want to fight this, I'm here too. So whatever you need, I understand." And then we went to bed and we slept. And that night I just couldn't sleep. Everything in me was in uproar. And I was revisiting all the little things we have together. Of course, we work together, that's one thing, but all the little experiences we've had together, having kids together, having life together, all the little inside jokes, all the little habits, and the thought of all that being gone was so excruciatingly painful that I realized that I was not ready to help him go. I couldn't do it. So when he woke up in the morning, I said, "You know what I said to you last night about I will support you no matter what.
Yeah,
what
if
you
I
need,
want to go.
If you want to go. I lied. I can't do that. You need to fight. And if you can't fight for you, you have to fight for me. And if you can't fight for me, you have to fight for our kids. And if you can't just fight for me and the kids, you have to fight for all the people who love your music and who need it in the world. You can't go. You just can't do it." And I was looking at him, and I could just see the feeling of overwhelm in his eyes, and I could see how little strength he had. And I just, at that point, he just kind of looked at me, and the message I got from him, I don't even think it was with words, it was just, "Well, if you want me to fight, I can't fight." I think you said that. And then I said, "Well, I will fight for you." And at that moment I knew that it meant I would have to carry him. I would have to carry everything that had been us before was now me. And his illness was now also my responsibility to carry him through. So at that moment I took on the enormity that it was of carrying everything that had been shared before was now mine to carry, plus the illness, plus all the trouble with no income and all the additional pieces that was a part of it. But the choice was either I give it everything I can, or he goes. And that was no longer an option for me. It was just not an option to let him go without a fight. I had to fight. But I had to go through that in myself. I had to get through that in some ways it would be easier to let him go. It would be easier to just say, okay. That doesn't require the same sacrifices. That doesn't require the same... in some ways it's an easier choice, but I couldn't do that, and I had to face that in myself. He matters so much to me that I'm willing to take on this fight. And then, from then on, there was no road back. That was a commitment, and that was just, okay, now I have to do everything I can.
Did it ever get to a point where you thought, this is just too much for me to bear? I've undertaken what you've just described. It's a Herculean effort, and you're holding it all together. Does that get to be too much sometimes?
I think it was too much at various times every day. It was so difficult to find my way through that, which was now a whole different world. Walter was still in it, but he was no longer participating in it. He was my sole focus, but he was not a partner in how I was used to. And I think if I hadn't really come to the point of the realization of the commitment of needing to fight to keep him here, that doubt would have gotten the better of me, would have gotten the best of me. But because it was such a commitment, I could revisit with that commitment and get through each of those moments that kept popping up, yes.
Walter, when you asked her just to let you go, and then you heard this, what was that like for you?
I was so sick, man. I mean, it was beautiful, and it gave me hope. Okay, she's really here for me, and things I'm unable to do, she's going to do, and we're going to face this together. But it was still, at that point, I was so sick that I was preoccupied with making it through my next breath. That was work. Just get through your next breath. That was hard work. And, it went for the next 6 to 8 months.
Did it ever get to a point where, despite your having said, okay, I'll fight, that you rethought that and felt...
Oh, yeah. But I never told her that. Yeah, I rethought that a few times. Especially when we were in Omaha and had been in that hospital for a long time, and I had some episodes where I had come really close to death, and there were times that they didn't think I was going to make it through the night, and they were trying to prepare her. Okay, he's done. And there were times I figured, I'm done. And but then, I'll be darned, the next day would come and there I was, But there were a couple episodes that they were basically, even this whole team of doctors was like, this is it.
I could see it in the faces of the nurses and the doctors that this is not good. Yeah.
How do you deal with the stress of all of this? This has to set your central nervous system afire with all sorts of terrible things, and your health could deteriorate from the stress standing alone. How do you each deal with something like that in that circumstance?
I think it was much rougher on her. She was up, she was lucid, she was functioning like a normal human being. I was so ill and so spaced out, and just, like I say, it was just to move. I couldn't eat. I didn't really eat for 6 months. I had a hose in my nose. And, an interesting sideline to this is that when your liver goes, what I learned was it's really affecting your digestion, and you cannot digest food. You can't digest it. So mentally you end up telling yourself that food is repulsive and disgusting. And I would lay in the hospital bed and I'd have the TV going, and every other commercial was for hamburgers or tacos or something like that. And I would have to close my eyes because the sight of solid food, I would start dry heaving. I'd be repulsed. And so it was all I could do just to breathe and to move. So it affected her much more. She was there seeing everything, and I was half the time in a daze, so.
There's no doubt afterwards we both had PTSD that we had to deal with, because you're in a battlefield and you see things that are so scary that you have to shut off to some extent to get through it. At the same time, as a caregiver, you have to stay on, because you have to ask questions. You have to be clear on what you can and what you can expect, what you can do. Also, stay on top of maybe the doctors give an order to nurses that doesn't necessarily make it into the notations, so the next doctor or next nurse on duty doesn't get the memo and continues the way it was. So you have to stay very clear as a caregiver, even though you are in a state of shock sometimes from what you've seen. Walter was in a coma at one point. So you see the doctors knock on his forehead, open his eyes, yell his name, and there's absolutely no response. You see blood and gore. You see things cut open. You see a lot of things that are equally as terrifying as they would be on a battlefield. Truly. The enemy is within, if you will, so it's even less tangible in some ways. So being a caregiver is frightening, but how do you? For me, it was a daily struggle to realize that my worry level was unnaturally or naturally very high all the time. And so my whole system was in a constant state of stress. So in order to counter some of that, I had to develop some techniques that would allow me to get through and stay functioning mentally sharp, and not get wrapped up in my fear to where I couldn't be effective as his helper. And also so that doctors and nurses could take me seriously. So I was not this spinning out of control worry monster that got in the way of their work, but be a partner for them. So it required me to stay clear mentally. And so the technique I developed was, every time the worry monster came, I asked myself, okay, what am I really afraid of? Okay, I'm really afraid of Walter dying. Okay. What can I do about that right now? Right now, I can make sure the notes that were just made get the next nurse on the next shift follows up on that. I can make sure, if he's able to, that he does get out of bed 3 times to move around a little bit. I can make sure that his food schedule gets taken care of. I can make sure that XYZ, little things that I could do. And then, okay, what can I had to then acknowledge that maybe 90% of my worry I could do absolutely nothing about. And I had to tell myself, okay, I now have to let this go. This is up for me. This is for me to take care of. This is not for me to take care of. But as long as I could break it into a little component that I could take care of, it helped with the powerlessness, and it helped with the depression, and it helped appease that worry monster enough that it didn't take me over. And then the spiritual practice of letting go. Let go and let God. Let go. This is not up to you.
I hear this as very Zen-like in many respects, because the concept that the great Zen masters try to teach is that we can't be burdened by our memories of the past, whatever they happen to be, and we can't be so fearful of the future that we forget that we're here now and we can do things today where we sit that are positive. And that's exactly what you achieved by having that focus. But that's it's easy to talk about, it's quite a thing to achieve it. And how do you get to that place?
Well, it's a matter of, it's not, so the thing I always thought was you achieve this place of serenity, or you achieve this technique, and then you're good. What I found was I had to revisit with this technique every day, sometimes every hour, sometimes every 10 minutes, to continually bring myself to a state of enough clarity that I could be effective, or that I could sleep at night. So it was not a state achieved, it was a practice that was continually in use for me.
One of the things, when she was saying she had to be very aware of what the doctors and nurses were doing, and one perfect example I can give you of this was I had an episode where I started bleeding, and they couldn't stop it, it didn't clot, and they started giving me transfusions, and they were pumping the blood into me as it was coming out, and they were keeping me alive that way, and they could not stop it. And I ended up getting something like 22 bags of blood, and they were trying to unfreeze them with hair dryers.
No, they had a machine to do it, but yeah.
Okay. I forget what I was saying now. I'm going to start over. I'm going to start again. I had a train of thought.
Sorry.
What was I talking about?
It was the thing about
the blood
worrying.
When they were pumping it in and they couldn't sustain it, and it was
I
bag after
had
bag.
an episode where I was bleeding and they couldn't stop it, and they were giving me lots and lots of blood and they couldn't stop it. They finally stopped it. They had given me 22 bags of blood. They finally stopped it. The next day, the nurses come in and they're giving me my medication, and one of the meds they're giving me is a blood thinner, and she says, "He's not clotting, why are you giving him a blood thinner?" And so just right there was something that she was on that they were not even aware of, because there's whole teams of doctors, and once one doctor might come in and say, let's do this and that, the other doctor doesn't get the message, or the nurse doesn't. It's there are some inefficiencies there, even though they did a remarkable job, and I have nothing but incredible things to say about the care we got. But there were those little glitches, and she was on it. The day after almost dying from uncontrollable bleeding, they want to give me blood thinners, and she's like, "No, what are you doing?" Because up until that point I had been getting them, I believe. And
a lot of families are surrounded by well-wishing people who offer help. But what many people need and don't realize is they need a patient advocate, as you, Marie, were in this case. And absent an advocate watching over this process, and it doesn't require medical training, but it requires diligence and vigilance to keep a loved one alive in these circumstances. And I think the pressure on being the advocate is a great one, but it's a role that's life-saving.
Yes, and if you can just apply a professional mindset and stay clear, that's one thing, but because you're so wrapped up in your own fears and worries and trepidations and depression, and you go through the ringer, it's difficult to stay mentally focused. And so that is the challenge, and it requires, I think, practice and a good practice and good support system is so important.
How hard is it to come up against these medical professionals? Because your common sense told you a blood thinner was the last thing he needed after this terrible incident, but these are professionals who've gone to medical school and have, nursing training, and you're stepping in to say, wait a minute, there's something wrong. Is that a hard role to play?
It was hard initially. I sort of had two scenarios. One scenario was at UCLA and one scenario was in Nebraska. At UCLA, I hadn't learned how to be that person yet. And I was still very wrapped up in my fears, and I didn't yet understand how to go up against nurses and doctors. So initially it was very difficult. They would say something, my memory and my gut feeling would be, you need to ask a question, but I was too polite. So I held back and I didn't do it. And I didn't want to antagonize them.
These are the people caring for the man you love, so you don't want to do anything to ruin that relationship,
Yes.
but you need to ask the questions.
And so I held back a lot. And so it took me a while to, one, gain their respect, to where they knew that I had researched what I was talking about, and I really was attempting to partner with them, not to antagonize them, or not to question their motives or anything. I was a partner. So it happened, both me accepting that I could be a partner and I could add value, and them accepting me as a partner, and learning to trust that I was not overly anxious all the time, or didn't repeat things or come at them with a suspicion, but just with well-meaning questions and constructive suggestions. So both, right?
Also, our incredible doctor, Dr. Schaefer, one day said to me, he's the greatest, but one day he said to me, Walter, your wife is very directive. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, she tells me what to do. And I laughed, and he said, you know what? I do it.
So there's an endorsement for doing what it takes.
Yeah. But that's after having that mutual
You built
relationship
that
of
relationship to a point that he could joke about it,
trust.
though.
You can't really start out that way.
And this was after the transplant, too.
Yeah.
This was not before.
Right. So
Yeah.
it takes time, and I think also a sense of respect for what they're doing without being bowled over by it, without having too much fear of authority to where you don't want to question it. So it's questioning it, but questioning it in a way that they don't find too disruptive. At the same time, there are times where you really need to put your foot down. So it's a relationship that builds, like any other relationship, And if you can somehow get across that you are really trying to partner with the medical staff and be the best help you can be, and take some of the burden off of them sometimes, maybe contribute by, it's a help when you help them remember things. It's a help when you try to smooth certain things out and ask constructive questions instead of the suspicious, off-putting ones.
Another one that I remember, one of the doctors came in, and I was on like 15 different meds at one point, right? And he came in and he took me off one of the meds. He said, he doesn't need this anymore. I'm taking this off. Later that night, the nurse came in with the meds, and she had it. And she's like, he's been taken off of that. And the nurse goes, well, I haven't been told. And she goes, well, you need to get in touch with this doctor so-and-so because he stopped that. And the nurse comes back and he goes, oh, you're right. we never got the message.
And it hadn't made it into the notes.
Yeah.
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 What's it like for each of you to completely give your life into someone else's hands and trust them? Because what you've both experienced is above and beyond what most people experience trusting a medical professional. What do you do to be at peace with handing your life over to the hands of another person?
I know for me it comes down to what's the alternative. When it comes down to you've got, your only hope for survival is that you get a transplant, and there's 120,000 people on the waiting list for a liver transplant. So there's a lucky few who get them. Most of the people on the waiting list don't. And something around 12 to 1,500 people die every week because they can't get that liver. So, but that's your only alternative. That is where your hope lies. Then you have to hope that you're in the hands of some great professionals, you know. And in UCLA, it's a great place. It's sort of considered the mecca of liver transplants, but they basically told her we can't do anything for him, you know. But we went to Omaha because of the phone call from Curtis Salgado, who gave her Dr. Schaefer's phone number, and he said, bring him out here. But we felt really good there. That is an incredible place with an incredible staff of people. And they treat you like a human being and not a number. Nothing against UCLA, that's a great place, but there just wasn't enough livers in Los Angeles. There was no chance I was going to get one there.
How many people, I wonder, have given up at that point and figured that there's no future for me? They've told me to go home and don't go to Omaha or the next step as you did.
I don't know.
It feels very counterintuitive to put a deathly ill man on a plane from one of the 5 top transplant centers in the United States to a Midwestern state that doesn't rank as highly. At the same time, I had done the research and found out that his statistical chances of receiving a donor organ were much better in Nebraska or in some other states than in the very populous states. California, Texas, New York, the East Coast in general are much more populous, and therefore there is much more competition about each organ.
Yeah.
So for me, it was a matter of, again, the Zen moment that allows you to get through the questioning that you give yourself about whether this is the right thing or not. For me at that point was, I did the research, I looked into the pros and the cons of each place, and then I made the best decision I could make at that moment. I was fortunate to have some third-party doctors in different locations as well that I could talk to and say, what do you think? Is this a solid choice? Is this going to be the right thing? I had a doctor in North Carolina who was very, very helpful and who could also encourage me and say, yeah, statistically you are going to have a better chance there. So when I felt I had enough both statistical and just sort of day-to-day information that backed up this decision to go out of state, to go somewhere else, it made it possible. It was not an easy decision, but it made it possible.
Even our main doctor at UCLA said this is a great move.
Yes.
I think he knew they couldn't really help us, and also they don't want to have the statistic of another guy died in their hospital waiting on a liver.
Yeah.
But he was very supportive. Oh, that's great. Yeah, you're going to Omaha. Beautiful.
There was a definite shift in the doctors, their sense of, so I think no matter how professional they are, they still are not getting too close with patients, they have a feeling they really can't help. They try to really stay a little bit detached from that. They do the job the best they can, but they know this is a losing battle. And I could feel a shift in how they addressed me, how they talked to me, how they all of a sudden also gained hope when the decision was being made, and I was working to get insurance clearance and working to get the transportation figured out, working to get Walter in hospital, in evaluation in Omaha. There was a lot of work that had to be done, and the more they could sense I was serious about it, the more supportive they got and the more excited they got for Walter, that there may be actually an avenue here that can help him.
We live in a world of great information overload, and whenever anyone hears that they've got anything medically related, for many people it's going to the internet and reading everything you can read on the internet, which we all know in some cases could be very unhelpful. How did you deal with the fact that you were being confronted with this, and you're in a sea of information and misinformation? What do you rely on to get your own view of what's right, and do you have a fear that you're missing something by not researching it yourself? How does all that come together?
My wife is someone who, when she decides to do something, she educates herself. She designed this house, and she basically took years to do it, and basically with the amount of research she did, she almost became an architect, freelance, amateur. I know that she went at it. She did the research, and I was in her hands. That really was up to her. I was not really reading that much. When that sickness kicked in, I was in very bad shape. And it was just to get out of the bed and try to make it from the bedroom out to here was a big thing for me to do. If I could actually walk from the bedroom to the kitchen on my own, that was the total, output of energy for the day, So I left it all up to her, and I was very confident that she's going to educate herself. And there were times she could talk with nurses and doctors almost on the same level and have all this info, and I'd lay in the bed listening to her like, wow, she sounds like one of these hepatologists here, She'd be using all these phrases and medical terms, and so now you can answer now that I've given you that little
How do you deal with that to get the information that you need without being moved by the false information that pushes you the wrong way, and not suffering overload from too much information?
I think it's impossible to go online and do a Google search when you are ill and not get overwhelmed. You do get overwhelmed if you do that.
Yeah.
So I probably found a couple of sources I really trusted, American Liver Foundation for some things, or there were a few things where I knew, okay, these people know what they're talking about. But for the most part, and because each situation is different, I really relied on partnering with the medical teams that knew Walter, because that would cut through the misinformation very quickly. And if I had doubts about some things, I would try to get a second opinion. I mean, for all of this, when it's something like this, there are teams of doctors. And so if one doctor says something, you try to, have the conversation with one of the other doctors maybe, and ask questions in a slightly different way, but make sure that you get a sense that there's consensus about the decision that's being made or the information that's coming forth. So So I tried to steer clear of Google as much as possible because that was the most anxiety-provoking thing in the world. At the same time, I did use it to gain general knowledge about what is this condition that Walter has, and what is it that physically happens in the liver. What is portal hypertension? What does that mean?
Yeah.
What does some of these terms that the doctors are hitting me with? I could go in specifically and research that. Like, what is portal hypertension? Okay, so the body's trying to make blood go around the liver because the main vein through the liver is blocked, that sort of thing. So I could understand what they were talking about with these terms. For that, Google was very helpful. But for general ideas about prognosis or treatment options, it was more not helpful than helpful. And the medical teams on the ground were where it was at for me.
We've gone almost 50 minutes here. Do you want to take a break now? This has been
I think
great.
this is good for now. Do you have something else?
Yeah.
No, but I'm kind of actually enjoying it. If you have
I can keep going.
I mean, I just don't want to
I can
push it
keep
too
going
far.
too.
Okay,
I mean,
if you don't mind. No.
Oh, not at all.
I just don't want it to be too much for both of you.
Dinner
Yeah.
will just be a little
And
delayed.
And I hope, I'm asking very personal questions. Don't answer them if they're wrong. But
Haven't asked one yet.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
you're great at Jesse. Your questions are perfect.
What's it like breaking this to your children? It's one thing to confront it yourself and face it yourself, but how do you tell your children? You've got 3 beautiful, intelligent, talented sons.
I'll leave that to her. I can tell you the one thing that was maybe the roughest for me in this whole thing to deal with, and that was when I had a blood test. I think it was trying to get insurance or something, and they told me I had a disease called hepatitis C, and there was no cure. And all I could think is my wife and my beautiful little baby children have it. I gave it to them. This beautiful family we've started. Everybody's going to die of this liver disease, and my kids are going to have it when they're little. So she had them all tested, and everybody was clean. But those days where I thought my whole family is going to have this, that was the roughest thing for me. And I really had a thing when she came home and she said, "We're all clean of it. We don't have it." It was much easier for me then to go, "Oh, well, maybe I'm going to croak, but at least they're okay," But as far as breaking it to the kids, that was really you, I think.
Oh, but in this case, it was really gradual because Walter was sick for a long time before he got sick, if you know what I mean. He had symptoms that were increasingly debilitating, really, for a decade. He was dizzy. He couldn't stand up sometimes on stage. He had cramps. He had frequent infections.
Severe cramps. I would get on stage and my hands would cramp excruciating, like Charlie horses in my fingers in the palm of my hands, and I couldn't play.
So what did
And
you
I'd
do
be
when
on
you're on
stage.
stage? When you're
The first time it hit me on a stage was at a massive festival in Holland. And we were doing our encore, and once again, Curtis Salgado got up to play with us, and we were doing Going Down. And all of a sudden, my hands went like that, and I opened my finger, and I played a solo with one finger. And there had been another time before that, though, that I was on stage at the Cincinnati Blues Fest, and I like almost blacked out, and I made my way to the drum riser and sat down, and they stopped the show, and they took me backstage to the paramedics, and my blood pressure was through the roof. I forget the actual number. It was like 300 over 150 or something ridiculous. And I sat there for a little while, and they said, we want to take you to the hospital. And I calmed down a little bit, and I actually went on and finished the show. But then after that, I always had equilibrium problems. I would have to sit, and then the cramps began, and then chronic fatigue. I was, to say tired doesn't cover it. I had absolutely no energy to even walk across the room. I was just like, so I would get up every night and I would force myself to go out and play the gigs, but it was actually terrifying to go on stage. It was horrifying. What was I going to do? I got to support my family.
What's it like to come back from a near-death experience? People talk about near-death experiences, and you came to the very, very edge. What's that like?
Well, I don't know how to explain that. It changes your perspective of things. It resets your priorities. It certainly gives you a much greater appreciation of being here, and you try to use the cliche, you try to not sweat the small stuff, but it definitely makes you aware that the most important thing you can have as a personality trait is gratefulness to be here and for what you have, and quit how come I don't have this, or how come this guy's got this gig and I don't, why does that guy sell more records than me, all of this. No, look at what you have, look at where you are, be grateful that you're here, and I am human. There are times those traits kind of go away and I'll find myself stewing in the old worries, but it's very easy to say, hey, wait a minute, you shouldn't even be here, and you have a great career and a beautiful family, and you have everything you ever wanted in your life. Why are you worrying about this crap, so it does change you drastically, I think, in a really good way.
When Walter was ill, I used to try and remember, what was it like to have a normal day? To get up, have coffee, go in my office, work on something that we were going to do together, then have dinner with the family at night, and have conversation about anything but illness, and just go through our day. And to me, all of a sudden I realized that everyday life was magical. That was where I was at. That was the gift of life that I had taken for granted for so many years. But that was it. That's what I missed. It wasn't the vacations or any of the things that you normally kind of pine for, maybe, when you go through your normal life and you don't have this perspective. But it was just everyday life. It was having a conversation. It was looking at each other and there would be no pain. It would be...
At end of the night, go out, watch a movie, and she lays down on the couch and I give her a foot massage. That's heavenly.
Yeah. Yeah. Normal everyday life was such a almost unattainable miracle that I couldn't imagine ever getting it again. And certainly getting it with you again.
Yeah. And
then when that happened, it's like, so now I pinch myself every day, particularly if I'm grouchy or something is happening, I can find that space again in myself and go, gosh, what am I talking about? This is nothing.
And it's very easy for me right now, who's been dealing with a broken finger since July, and it's now broken 3 times. And I haven't been able, I've been playing with 3 fingers since July, I have to keep this thing on for at least 24 hours a day for at least another 2 months. And it's very easy for me to get into why me. And then after I get into that, I go, wait a minute. I'm still out playing. I still have my family. Everything's fine.
And you're soloing with 3 times as many fingers as you soloed with when you had 1 finger to solo.
Yeah, exactly. And then you go, why me? And then you go, well, why not me? It's just another. I have an old song I wrote in the 90s. The last verse is, life ain't ever easy. Every day's a test. You got to give it all you got. You got to try to do your best. You got to do your best. And I'm like, that's it. Every day's a test. What do you got? What are you made of? You gonna sit around and weep because you got 3 fingers? Or you gonna go out with your 3 fingers and do everything you can possibly do? You know? Do you know the Itzhak Perlman story of the broken string?
I've heard it before, but I'd love to hear you tell it again.
He came out, it's a true story. He came out at Symphony Orchestra Hall there in New York with the New York Philharmonic to do a violin concerto, and he was playing it and he broke a string. A string popped on his Stradivarius. The whole place did an inhale. The conductor stopped. The whole place sat there. He sat there for a minute. He said, start it up. They started it up. He did the whole thing on 3 fingers. He got a 20-minute standing ovation, and then he said, sometimes it is the task of the artist to make as much music as you can with what you've been given. There it is.
With 3 strings, right?
With 3 strings. He played the whole concerto.
Yeah.
You know, do what you can with what you've been given to work with, you know.
And that really, for all of us, is a lesson that lifts us all higher, that whatever we're given that seems broken, imperfect, incomplete, or we're missing all the pieces to do it, we're actually not missing those pieces if we look at it the way you've just described.
Yeah.
And just like Itzhak Perlman got a 20-minute standing ovation, and everyone in that audience had an unforgettable moment that they will never forget when he made that determination and transposed everything onto 3 strings, which is a huge task to do.
Yeah.
He gave everyone in that audience a special experience, and he had it himself. There was a bond that was forged in that moment. And I think that's sometimes what happens in illness too. We have a moment to make connections with other people, to get out of our comfort zone, get out of everything that we're used to, and improvise and do things that we never thought we would be asked to do. And sometimes in that process, as others watch, they contribute and they are part of lifting us and lifting the situation, and it becomes a communal experience that's bigger than us. So I think sometimes when we ask ourselves, why me, and this is horrible and this shouldn't happen, we're forgetting that there are also opportunities in these moments that will enrich life, that will give new perspective and new opportunities for a bond, and for us to find things in ourselves that we didn't know we had. And it takes struggle, it takes trial and error, it takes all kinds of things that are not fun or convenient or comfortable. But in that experience is also a gift. You know?
And also, I think with her, when she was in Omaha and I was laying there on my deathbed, and she started posting every day, I think she found her voice as a writer. I think that's when you found your voice. You found your way of writing and of communicating to people, And that was something that came out of that we never would have expected.
That's right. Because I was always holding back on being transparent. I wouldn't let people know if I was going through something difficult. I would, nope, this is mine to carry. I'm not going to burden others with this. I'm not going to be the one that breaks bad news to people. I'm not going to do that. And through the experience of when I had to share, because that gave me strength to share what was actually going on, and then having people comment and give me love and give me support, and in our case also enormously crucial financial support that got us through the situation. But that experience of others responding to what I wrote, not because I was trying to handle it all myself, but because I was pretty clear that I don't have the answers here and I don't know where this is going to go. But this is what I'm doing now, and this is how it feels to be in this place right now. That was my voice that I didn't know how to express before, because I was raised in suburbia where you hold back on sharing your difficulties, you hold back on sharing your difficult feelings, and you're afraid that others are going to judge you if you don't have it together and if you don't have all the answers.
Don't you feel rather exposed, though? This is the most highly personal stuff you could possibly share with another human being. And it's out on a public forum now, this very personal information. How does that feel? Is that scary?
Every time I pushed that button to share an update, I was shaking. Every time. It was not easy. It got a little easier as I got through the process, and I received such overwhelmingly positive response from people and enormous support of keep going, it's great what you're doing, and I look every day for your updates. We stand with you. That was the best. We stand with you. That feeling of not being alone was such a support, and particularly because I was so honest. They really stood with me where I was, not where I pretended to be, but where I truly was. And yes, that was difficult, but that reward and that feeling of people appreciating my honesty was such a surprising gift that it taught me a lot about what really makes us human. And I have to say, it was my research about blues music that led me there, that gave me the courage to share, because that's really what blues musicians have done over the times. They have shared their emotions, whether they're good or bad, but particularly those that are difficult to verbalize and difficult to express their anguish and their feelings of despair. They have shared it in music, and blues fans told me in my research how much that meant to them, that these emotions that they could feel but couldn't really figure out how to express were now expressed by this blues musician, and then they could respond and find that place in themselves, or they could just feel how it moved them. Oh my gosh, if that blues musician doesn't even have money to put gas in his tank, or that blues musician can't even eat, or that blues musician is on a bed that's cold and wet and damp, how lucky am I that I'm not there, and how horrible for him. So it was like that sharing from that place of I don't know what to do, but I'm sharing here, was a gift to people. So it changed me. It gave me the courage to write more like a blues musician, to write more transparent and less pretense and facade. Take that to the side, and what's really important is that this is an authentic, true expression of what's going on. And that's not burdening other people. They find it as a gift that I'm letting them into our situation so that they can actually help, whether it's sending prayers, sending thoughts, giving me comments that were truly on point and helpful, or it was the $5 that, through the thousands of people that contributed, made us get through all the expenses we had with no income for 2 years. So it was a life-changing gift to learn to speak from that place.
Walter, I mean, you've lived a life from the earliest years saturated in music. Everything has been music. How has your view of music changed through the illness? I mean, what was it like going through as a musician with what goes on in your mind every day, hearing this music, when you get that ill, and then when you're in the recovery phase?
When I was in the depths of the illness, I could not stand to listen to music. I didn't want to know about it. It was too painful.
Because of the loss, or it was
Because
just
of the
much?
loss, and because a lot of music sets me off and reduces me to tears. I mean, music that wouldn't reduce other people to tears. I can hear wop bop a loo bop a wop bam boom and weep like a baby, right? So the emotions that it can bring up, I was having a hard enough time existing. And I didn't want to know about music. I didn't think I'd ever play again. My son John came to Omaha and brought me a Stratocaster and said, you need to keep at this. And they sat me in a chair and they put the guitar in my lap, and I did not have the strength to press the string to the fret. And I said, you've got to take it out of here. I can't even look at it. I can't do it anymore. It's something I used to do. And I did not want to hear it. A very dear childhood friend of mine sent me the biggest iPod they make, and he had put 6,000 songs on there for me. I couldn't even plug it in and listen. I was not interested. And it's going to be hard to tell. Then one night I was channel surfing because I couldn't sleep at all. I had all these hoses in me, and there was lights flashing on the IV, and there was beeping and stuff all the time. And every 20 minutes a nurse would come in and go, are you okay? Go to sleep. And then 20 minutes later, we're just checking in. So I'd lay there all night and I'd watch TV. And at about 4 a.m. one night, there was a Donna Summer concert on. And it put me back in touch with music. And I laid there and watched it and was a wreck. And once again, I saw the glory and the majesty of what music can be and what it can do. And it really put me back in touch. It was revelatory. And I'll never forget it. But up until that point, if I was channel surfing and Austin City Limits came on or something, get it off. Even though I don't care about sports, I would watch college football before I would watch somebody playing music. If I had a talk show on and a band came on, I'd change the station, you know. But then that night, that live Donna Summer concert destroyed me, and I reconnected with the beauty of it, you know.
How did it feel after that change? Did you wake up the next day knowing that it was different now?
I knew that, well, this is what I do, and this is what I used to do, and maybe someday I will be able to do that again, but I could listen to music and I could enjoy it again. I could put my headphones on and listen to that iPod and drift off into a song, which I had not been able to do for months. I did not want to know about it. It was like solid food. I couldn't deal with it, you know.
Your system couldn't tolerate it.
And my emotions couldn't tolerate the music. Could not stand it. It was too much for me. But my God, did Donna Summer just destroy me that night. I mean, they could hear me sobbing down the hall, man. It was just beautiful, the experience I had there. Never forget it.
For me, it was similar but different. I couldn't listen to music either. It was too painful because it reminded me of what we might lose, what we were probably losing, what we certainly had lost temporarily, and all the things that Walter is and the experiences we've had with music. So it was too painful to listen to, but because I was doing the research on the blues and blues fans, the history of African American suffering resonated with me in a whole different way than it had before, because their suffering was so much more intense than what I was going through. Even at what I considered the worst, you know, I'm about to lose my husband maybe, and there is no cure. The doctors want to help, but they can't. And the desperation I felt, and the economic frailty, and all that was terrifying. I had a bed to sleep in. My kids had beds to sleep in. They had a caretaker with them. They were safe. My husband was in a place where everything was being done and he was being taken care of, and we had, at least for the time being, the ways of paying for it. And I thought of these people who have lived for generations with uncertainty that is unbearable, uncertainty for themselves, their own safety, the safety of their children. Mothers watching their children go out not knowing if they're going to come back because the neighborhood is so scary. The history certainly of African American slavery and sharecropping and Jim Crow, and the in danger that these people lived in. And what hit home the hardest for me was how mothers would have to consider the safety of their children without having any kind of power to control anything. And the excruciating experience that must have been. And so therefore, by contrast, I could consider myself lucky even in this situation. And so the blues, again, the plight of African Americans taught me something incredibly valuable. And it's another way that I was really changed, because our situation is resolved, but in many, many ways, the situation of oppressed and marginalized people, it continues, you know, and not just in America, but in so many places in the world that are war-torn, or you know, there's this suffering that's so much greater than anything I went through at that time. And that perspective really did knock some sense into me sometimes, to where I could see myself and the privilege that I truly have in a new light.
And what she was talking about earlier when she said about laying in a cold, wet bed, she's talking about Blind Willie Johnson, how he died, right? Yeah. So.
Walter, in coming through this, you came out of this experience a different man, and Marie, you're a different woman than you were. How does this change the dynamics of a relationship that was beautiful before this happened, but now you've had different roles? Things have been shaken up in a way that neither of you could ever have anticipated. How does that change things?
Well, it wasn't always beautiful. You know, I mean, we're human here, you know. Boy, I don't know. How do you answer that question?
Well,
I don't know if I want to jump into that minefield.
I thought it was good you got a stab at this one, Walter. I'd like to hear. I think that, well, certainly when I met Walter, it was very important to him that he was sort of going to be able to take care of me and be, you know, a strong force. And certainly in this relationship, at this time of our relationship, that role didn't work for you. You couldn't take care of anything.
I couldn't take care of myself. I couldn't walk. I could
Right.
barely breathe, you know.
So I think for Walter, he really learned to trust me in a way, and also learned to let go of having to be in charge.
Yeah.
And I learned to be more comfortable with really just taking charge, not necessarily, I couldn't ask him for advice or for, what do you think here or there? I mean, I had to just take the lead. And so I think it really rattled the fundamental dynamic between us, or an expectation of a dynamic between us. And so we've had to work to find our way back. So I mean, it was very easy for me to continue to just make all the decisions for a while. And for Walter was like, hey, wait a minute, I'm here now. I have a say, you know. And I was like, well, you know, it took me a little while to then again learn to integrate and let go of that. So I think actually now it's more, because Walter has really learned to let go, we can be more equal, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Sure. But it was always, after we had kids, it was always where I'd go off on the road. She'd be here taking care of kids. I'd go away for maybe 10 weeks, and then I'd come home, and they'd have to figure out, how does this guy fit in with our life? So that thing of, it's always been like that in a certain way. You were making all the decisions, running the show completely, taking care of 3 kids on your own, and then I come home and I want to be part of it. And how do we negotiate that water there? Mm-hmm. That was always a little, not difficult, but it took work.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It took work. We both knew what was going to happen. I'm coming home now. Here I come, right? So it's going to be different for both of us.
But I think, honestly, you've gotten nicer.
I think I got nicer after the transplant, partly because I'm more grateful to be here, and I'm more thankful for what I have, and in some ways, I used to take it for granted. The same way I used to take gigging for granted. I used to get up on stage and think to myself sometimes, oh, it's another gig. I've done this 10,000 times. Here I am. I can do this. I'll be up there. Not, you know, once in a while, HBO's on when I get to the hotel, you know. And there were some times in the old days that I'd be watching that clock. I want to get this gig over with. I want to get to the hotel and, you know, kick back and have a couple of cookies. And no, now it's not, don't take it for granted, because it was taken from me and I had to work to get it back. I had to work to relearn how to play. And so, yeah, if I got nicer, I want to be nicer. I want to be aware of what I have, and I don't want to take it for granted, and I want to be valued, and as I value all of you, and I value all of this.
But I think it's also a component of being more comfortable with your role as a man, because the expectation that you have to do this, and you have to look this way, and you have to be this way, and you have to show up this way, was really taken from you for a while. So you had to sort of find your way back in a different way that really included me in a different way.
Yeah.
So I like our relationship better afterwards.
Me too.
It's more open.
One of the things in the hospital that was really difficult was you have to throw out any sort of pride or human dignity you have. if you're laying there and you soil yourself in the bed, those nurses are going to come in and mop you up, and you can't attend. Yeah, I'm a cool guy. No, it's like, come here, help. You have to ask for help, and suddenly all of the pride and the dignity and whatever sort of little macho thing, I'm a man type thing you have, that's gone. And you learn from that.
You learn from that. I don't think everybody.
No, I don't mean you. I mean, one does learn from losing your dignity. And the nurses were always great at not making me feel bad and just saying, hey, this happens. It's okay. Don't worry about it. But it's embarrassing that you have to ask sometimes for what you need them to do. And you have to throw away your pride, your humility, your dignity, and just put yourself on their mercy. And that's quite a lesson. When you get out of there, it's like, wow, you know.
Is it liberating in some ways that you're free from having this stereotypical need to be?
It is, but that's also one of those things that sometimes it's not part of me all the time. Just like I'll still sometimes on stage find myself starting to take the gig for granted, and I'll say to myself, hey, a-hole, what are you doing? This could be the last time you ever do this. This was taken from you. Here you are. You get to do this. How many people in the world would love to have this opportunity to do what you're doing? You're up here communicating and playing your own music for a room full of people. You know, give it everything you have. Once in a while, the old me will pop in there. Once in a while, the old me might crop up, but then the guy who's laying in the soiled sheets needing to be cleaned up will come back. And it does create humility, you know.
Yeah, and it'll pop up between us, that sense of, why can't you just, or why isn't it, or, you know, and then, but I think we just talk about it differently. There's a little bit more of a common ground place where we can have a conversation that before was closed off.
Sounds like a good name for a song.
Yeah.
On that note, why don't we take a break?